The Great War ravaged Europe, and the terrible living conditions of the German Empire led to the Germans surrendering to the Allies. Soon afterwards, several extensive treaties were signed in order to establish an everlasting peace in Europe. This included several major territorial concessions, war reparations, and war guilt onto Germany. While the conditions of these treaties were harsh, the American President Woodrow Wilson's 14 points had many Germans interpreting the wording to mean that the lands where Germans were inhabiting would all be under one state. This therefore would mean that the lands of Austria would become members of a new German republic. This led me to wonder, what would happen if the Austrians were allowed to unite with the Germans in the aftermath of the Great War? How would this affect interwar Germany? How would the Entente react? Come join me as we explore this timeline together. In order to allow Austria to unite with Germany, we would need to have an alternate Treaty of Saint-Germain. While the Versailles Treaty was the most famous of all the post-war treaties, there were several other treaties that handled the destinies of the Central Powers. This included Austria, who at the time of ratification of this treaty was styling itself as the Republic of German Austria. The Entente were specifically wishing to secure their position in Europe and to never allow their former enemies to grow strong enough to cause another conflict. So the concept of allowing Austria to unite with Germany was absurd. So it was strictly denied in our Treaty of Saint-Germain. However, in this timeline, I would need to ensure the outcome of Saint-Germain was different. In this timeline, we will have Woodrow Wilson directly involved in the Treaty of Saint-Germain, and in his intervention, allow the Austrians to unite with Germany. This point of divergence is admittingly weak, as we cannot truly guarantee that Wilson was wanting to adhere to his 14 points strictly. However, we could simply assume that Wilson would fear the results of selectively applying his principles, so he demands that Austria be allowed to ascend into Germany. This would be simply unacceptable for the Entente without further stipulations. For example, the Republic of German Austria technically controlled the Sudetenland. In order to ease the fears of the Entente, all claimed territories of the Czechs, Italians, and Yugoslavians would be conceded to them, while also forcing Austria proper to remain demilitarized, in the same way that the Rhineland was. Also, for fun, let's have Vorarlberg be annexed into Switzerland. In our timeline, the westernmost province of Austria, Vorarlberg, had an election to decide whether they should stay as a part of Austria or join Switzerland as a canton. The vote actually went in favor of Switzerland, but due to the outcome of Saint-Germain, this too was denied by the Western powers. In this timeline, due to the insistence that Austria unite with Germany, we will have the other great powers agreeing to Swiss expansion. This way, the new German Republic would be slightly smaller than it would otherwise, at the very least. With the compromise just barely succeeding, Austria would soon become a state within the German Republic. The alternate outcome of this treaty would be extremely controversial. Italy would be incredibly concerned with the admittance of the Austrians into the German Republic, further buying into the mutilated victory narrative. This idea of the mutilated victory would soon ripple into the consciousness of the French, who would see American intervention in the post-war peace to be at best incredibly misguided, and at worst, a grand conspiracy in which the Americans were seeking to dominate the world. While many in Germany were satisfied with the compromises which led to Austrian ascension into Germany, there were many citizens who feared the German Republic would soon oppress their regional cultures and way of life. In our timeline, several Rhinish Germans feared that Prussian dominance in their regional politics would soon lead the industrious Rhinish to be subject to Prussian militarism and its horrors. This saw many Rhinish nationalists fighting against the German Republic to secede and create their own Rhinish Republic. This movement was supported by the French government as they saw the benefit of having a buffer state along their border with Germany. In this timeline, the idea of separating away from the Berlin-dominated Weimar Republic would also gain traction in Austria. Austrian nationalist movements would begin to organize and gain support from the French and Italian governments, who would fear the potential of a unified Germany. The situation would escalate further as the French and Italians would officially recognize the Rhinish and Austrian republics. As the crisis of the 1920s continued, the NSDAP and their leader, Adolf Hitler, attempted to take over Bavaria and then spread his revolution to all of Germany. However, his attempt would be swiftly put down by local police. Hitler would remain in prison until his trial, which would happen at a much later date. Tensions continued to rise, as many people in Europe were fearful of another war. Due to this, the League of Nations convened to settle the conflict between Germany and their European adversaries. The result of the conference would result in the French occupational forces being withdrawn from the Rhine, German accession to the League of Nations, and the support of partisan operations to immediately cease. This outcome thoroughly humiliated France and would solidify the French general public's distrust of the West, as French nationalists became more and more paranoid of an international plot to destroy the French way of life. They turned to Mussolini's new 20th century ideology of fascism. Mussolini had successfully taken over Italy just before the situation in Germany nearly boiled over into war, and they had, as it seemed to many, managed to avoid a crippling general strike through their policies. While the reality was much more grim, the perceived success of the new ideology led to many French nationalists to adopt the ideology themselves. After the French and Italians nearly arbitrated another war between themselves and Germany, the Germans were incredibly relieved to have had their nation properly respected. The League of Nations had, in Germany's view, properly achieved its goals of preserving peace in the world, and had treated the young republic with respect as an equal instead of a subjugated power. This, on top of the Austrian accession to Germany, would diminish the political strength of the far-right and far-left organizations within the state. While the strain of war reparations on the economy would still cause hyperinflation and general dissatisfaction, the Dawes Plan would alleviate the pressure on the state and would cement Germany as a strictly democratic nation. Due to this shift of loving democracy, when Hitler was put on trial for his treasonous acts against the Republic, he was given no quarter and sentenced to life in prison. Germany was about to be carved up by foreign powers, and the first thing that Hitler decided to do was attempt to take over with an ideology similar to Italian fascism. There would be no leniency towards Hitler's verdict, and he would spend the rest of his life in this timeline rotting in prison. While the NSDAP would be headless, the threats towards democracy in Germany were not done completely. Prussian militarists and aristocrats would continue to attempt their perversions of the state. The further liberalization of Germany led to Konrad Adenauer come to power in Germany. Despite his involvement in the Rhinish movement, he was able to quickly distance himself from it once it started to become much more radical. Instead of going with the violent route of secession, Konrad proposed that the solution to the conflict was to limit the size of the Prussian state within the Weimar Republic. Thus, in 1930, the German Republic would break apart the Prussian state into smaller regions to grant the people of these regions representation. This form was incredibly popular in the Rhineland and alleviated the concerns of the Prussian domination in other smaller regions of the Federal Republic, but was thoroughly despised by the Prussian aristocracy. Only time would tell if the conservative elements of the military would stay loyal to the Republic or turn their backs on democracy. But for now, Germany was united and stable, albeit still recovering from hyperinflation and with a debilitated military. Due to this alternate outcome of the post-war treaties, there was a significant impact on geopolitics. The German Republic, as compared to our timeline, was beginning to show signs of recovery. Meanwhile, the French general populace became more and more disillusioned with democracy, and overall an anti-Western ideal became more prominent within the state. What will happen next for our tumultuous Europe? What will come of the far right in France? Will German democracy survive? Tune in next time as we explore the rise of the far right in France and the formation of the Latin Axis.